Your Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening dinner of the 17th IISS Manama Dialogue. Allow me to thank His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa bin Salman Al Khalifa, His Royal Highness Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, the Crown Prince and Prime Minister, and the government and people of Bahrain for their support to the IISS in organizing this splendid annual International Security and Regional Diplomatic Summit. It is a tribute to the tremendous work done by this country in managing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that we are able safely to host such a large in-person intergovernmental meeting here in the Kingdom of Bahrain. This weekend, we have over 300 in-person delegates here from over 40 countries, with several dozen government ministers, national security advisors, and intelligence chiefs in attendance. It was excellent that last December we were able to have a limited but vital in-person Manama dialogue. The fact that this year we are back almost to full strength is thanks to a really well-managed COVID crisis with excellent testing and vaccination rates. No one can fail to be impressed by the professionalism with which the Kingdom of Bahrain has executed this strategy. Happily, the IISS has also had another extraordinary year, providing the data and analysis that governments and the private sector need on an ever wider range of geopolitical and geoeconomic issues. The Institute has grown substantially. We are proud to have opened a new IISS Europe office in Berlin, which will help to animate the foreign policy and security debate in Europe. There, too, our international personality is reaffirmed. 18 staff, but 12 nationalities are represented. Crucially, we aim to bring our specialist expertise on the Indo-Pacific and the wider Middle East, strengthened by the international offices that we have in Singapore, Washington, and here in Manama, to support European policy discussions there. We look forward to ever closer links between our offices in London, Berlin, Washington, Singapore, and the Kingdom of Bahrain. Three trends of relevance to this conference have marked the last year in international relations. First is intervention fatigue. Second is the rise of minilateral security arrangements. And third is the growing priority of the Indo-Pacific in the strategic calculations of most countries around the world. First, from the US to Europe to the Gulf, states have tired of military intervention. In some cases, exit strategies have been more focused on exit than on strategy. In others, the reliance on local forces to contain the effects of internal conflict has not paid security dividends. In most, the peace processes that would underpin a lowering of military engagement are fragile and intermittent. As Afghanistan, Mali, and Yemen see a reduction in external military engagement with no commensurate increase in the quality of national governance, the risks of renewed or intensified terrorist activity locally, regionally, and internationally potentially increase. Intervention fatigue and strategic impatience are two sides of the same coin. Neither attitude of mind can prevent threats from developing, and the coexistence of both may inspire malign transnational actors to try their luck. Leaders in North America, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, perhaps to their strategic irritation, will need to find ways to cooperate on counterterrorism instruments in these new conditions. The lethal disruption of emerging threats may become more necessary in these circumstances, though more difficult, given the loss of intelligence that is a result of serial disengagement from key theaters. In the Middle East, there is perhaps less sign of intervention fatigue from Iran, whose well-maintained international influence networks remain capable of affecting political outcomes in several countries in which they operate. as the IRGC values its international influence network even more than it does the state's ballistic missile and nuclear programs, the odds of reaching a satisfactory follow-on agreement to the JCPOA that usefully constrains all elements of Iran's power are limited. In any case, there are well-grounded concerns about the acceleration of its centrifuge production program. The new government in Tehran no doubt needs sanctions to be lifted, but is unlikely to agree to a measurable reduction of its regional influence operations, even if that could be defined in a negotiated text to achieve that. How deterrence and defense postures can shape strategic perceptions in Iran is a subject that will naturally be central to our reflections this weekend. Generally, intervention fatigue does not automatically lead to conflict termination, and de-escalation does not naturally slide into détente. Apparently settled security alignments are shifting as countries hedge their strategic positions. Hence the second trend of multiplied minilateralism. Alliance and partnership structures are changing to accommodate the shifting environment. More countries are engaging in what might be styled strategic self-determination, setting out their own particular security priorities with greater precision and making their own ad hoc, often informal, strategic arrangements. And this is true from Europe to the Indo-Pacific. As large security institutions become difficult to manage and strategic autonomy proves hard to achieve, inevitably smaller coalitions of the willing, special purpose strategic vehicles and minilateral arrangements of all kinds begin to multiply. From the nuclear propulsion sharing agreement between Australia, the UK, and the US, known as AUKUS, to new alignments in the Eastern Mediterranean, changing relationships in the Red Sea region, and the reinforcement of various Quad arrangements by India, both East and West, this minilateral trend is clear, and the IISS Manama Dialog needs to take stock of how this fast-paced diplomacy is helping to stabilize regions or conversely adding to uncertainty. Third is the growing stature of the Indo-Pacific in the hierarchy of global priorities. The US, UK, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and the EU have all identified Indo-Pacific tilts, strategies, or guidelines in their national policies. NATO has pointed out that China is now present and active in Europe's strategic space. In the Gulf region, engagement with China, Japan, ASEAN, and the Indo-Pacific generally has grown. Economic and political links are strengthening. Equally, it is widely acknowledged in both the Middle East and Asia that these two regions are strategically codependent. Instability in the Middle East can easily be exported to, and indeed imported by, Asian societies and states. For that reason, we at the IISS want to ensure that there is useful cross-pollination between our two major security summits, the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore and the IISS Manama Dialogue here in Bahrain. We are therefore delighted that our speaker this evening is General Prabowo Subianto, Minister of Defense of the Republic of Indonesia. Minister Prabowo has led the Ministry of Defense since 2019 and has led the Greater Indonesia Movement, one of Indonesia's largest political parties, since founding it in 2008. But Minister Prabowo's family is no stranger to national leadership. His father, Sumitro Joyo Hadikusumo, served several times as a minister in the early cabinets of the Republic, and his grandfather founded Indonesia's central bank. Minister Prabowo's years in electoral politics follow a military career which saw him rapidly rise through the ranks to command Kopassus, the Indonesian Army Special Forces. It was under General Prabowo's command that Kopassus staged Operation Cendrawasih, which rescued 9 British and Dutch hostages in the Indonesian province of Papua in 1996. And since becoming defense minister in 2019, Minister Prabowo has placed a particular focus on building up Indonesia's military capabilities through acquisitions, particularly those that would help to patrol Indonesia's vast territory in the air, on land, and at sea. These capabilities will become more important as the Indo-Pacific region, with Indonesia at its heart, becomes more contested in the years to come. But the minister's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, in which he directed Indonesia's armed forces to increase hospital bed capacity and to invest in food security, also suggests a broader perspective on how defense establishments should conceive of security issues. We look forward to hearing your thoughts, Minister Prabowo, on these subjects in your remarks, and the floor is yours. Thank you, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. His Excellency Sheikh Muhammad bin Mubarak Al Khalifah, Deputy Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bahrain, His Excellency Lieutenant General Abdullah bin Hassan Al Noaimi, Minister of Defense Affairs, Kingdom of Bahrain, Dr. Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain, Dr. John Chipman, Director General and Chief Executive of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. First of all, let me thank you for the great honor you have given me, inviting me to take part in the Manama Dialog, and also to give me the great honor of giving an opening address. I hope I will not be too long in my address. It is my privilege to address this dialogue, especially with its most timely theme of multilateralism. I've been asked to comment on Indonesia's global and regional priorities, how Indonesia articulates its defense and security policies, and its relationship with the Middle East. It is easiest for me to address the last point first, to say that Indonesia and the Middle East, the Arab world, are closely interconnected would be an understatement. I do not need to remind those here that Indonesia has the largest Muslim majority population. We are the largest Muslim majority country in the world. And our people look with respect and affection towards the Middle East, towards the Arab world, which is the birthplace of our sacred faith. There was also, in this past hundreds of years, a vibrant Middle Eastern Arab diaspora that settled in the Indonesian archipelago, and their descendants now count among the leaders of Indonesian society. They are leaders in Indonesian political life, in our business, and in our religious and educational communities. On a personal level, while this is my first visit to this outstanding kingdom, which I have heard a lot about, I count myself fortunate to be here today. I have also been on close terms with many leaders of the Middle East for the past years. I greatly value their views and counsel, and I'm confident that will never change. Regarding Indonesia's security interests in the Middle East, let me also offer a few words. It is no secret that many Indonesian religious hardliners and extremists have been greatly influenced, not to mention trained and funded by like-minded groups in the Middle East. For example, the nexus between Al-Qaeda and Jama'ah Islamiyah, and between ISIS and its Indonesian affiliate, JAD. We obviously monitor these ties very closely, and we maintain cordial ties with our Middle Eastern counterparts in the counterterrorism sector. More generally, we maintain a close eye on regional security complications. What happens here in the Arab world can reverberate greatly in Indonesia. We sometimes joke that when the Middle East sneezes, Indonesia catches a cold. This is only a slight exaggeration. Tensions here can significantly agitate the Indonesian grassroots. It goes without saying that stability, peace, and prosperity in the Middle East, in the Arab world, is greatly welcomed in Jakarta. Our people follow events and developments in the Middle East very closely. The conflicts and the tension and the violence that occur in the Middle East greatly saddens our people. The Indonesian people always would like to see a renaissance in the Arab world, a renaissance of peace and prosperity. And for us, of course, the Palestine problem, the Palestine issue remains a matter that is of great concern to Indonesian population. Indonesia, I would like to reiterate, supports a peaceful resolution that encompasses a two-state solution for Palestine. And we are very willing to do all we can to enhance and improve the prospects of such a solution. Indonesia is situated in the crossroads between two great continents and two great oceans. About 60% of world trade goes through Indonesian waters. Indonesia today is a melting pot of many races, of many ethnic groups, of many cultures, of many religions. We are the home of nearly all the world's great religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and we have our own indigenous religions, which were practiced many centuries before the arrival of the great religions of the world. Therefore, our basic nature and character is one that is open to external relations, welcoming to all guests, and always trying to achieve harmonious atmosphere, to live in peaceful coexistence with all parties. Therefore, our defense posture is basically a defensive one. We have no territorial aspirations outside our national territory. Therefore, we have no real need for power projection too far away from our national homeland. This will reflect, and this is reflected in our continuing development of our defense posture and defense strategy. Historically, we have always relied on the concept of the total people's defense, what we call in the Indonesian acronym Hankam Rata, the system of the total people's defense. For many centuries, this has been the defensive posture of nearly all our kings, our sultans, our princes. The Indonesian archipelago consisted of many kingdoms, principalities, and sultanates. And the military system has always been not of a big standing army, but of a small standing army, but with a big people's military. When there were no emergencies and no wars, most of the armies would return to their villages and they take up their profession mainly as farmers. When the kings, princes, and sultans call for an army to be assembled, then the farmers would take up arms and join their leaders answering the call of their various kings, sultans, and princes. This has been our tradition. This was how we gained our independence, fighting against the colonialists. We have fought the foreign invaders and colonialists from ancient times. Many times, it would take us many years, and we experienced many defeats. But ultimately, our experience convinced us that without the strong support of the people, no foreign invader can endure in our archipelago. This is the background of our defensive posture. Therefore, in its implementation, we organize our military in territorial commands, starting from the sub-village to the village, sub-district to the district, and thus to the province and the national level. As I took over as Minister of Defense, it has been my policy to reorientate our defensive posture back to our historical experience, back to our roots. I am convinced that we must build up again our self-confidence, believing in our own strength, not relying on any external protectors. We must believe in our own strength, our own collective experience as a nation and as a culture. Of course, that means that we have to maintain the best of relations with all countries, all neighbors, and all powers. I want to describe now Indonesia's priorities that has intersected with multilateralism. In our experience, we have always been non-aligned. We have always tried to maintain equidistance and friendship with all the great powers. But we realize that sometimes we will be drawn in by the dynamics of any regional struggle for influence, for dominance, and for power. That is the nature of humanity, and therefore we must be realistic. Sometimes the need and the desire to maintain neutrality, to maintain non-alignment will be very difficult. Indonesia has always been influenced by the great ideological struggles of the world. The Cold War came to Indonesia. There were great ideological contests between communism, between capitalism, between religious extremism, and between ethnocentric and ethno-nationalist separatism. We also had problems with our neighbors. There were territorial claims overlapping. There were also rivalry based on ideology. Many countries of our neighbors were very close to the West. Others were close to the communist powers. We did have our problems, but we resolved it through multilateral solutions. Indonesia and four of our neighbors, we formed a multilateral association, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. And through ASEAN, we have overcome many of our territorial problems, many of our conflicts with our neighbors. We resolved our conflict with Malaysia. Now we are very close. Now we consider Malaysia one of our closest partners. We resolved our problems with other countries. Now we are very friendly with Australia. Australia is also a very good partner of us. We have the best of relations with the Philippines, although the Philippines had a very long festering insurgency in the South Philippines, which basically are of the same ethnic stock as Indonesia and Malaysia. The South Philippines basically are Muslim and Malay culture. But we decided on the ASEAN tradition, which is not to interfere in the domestic problems and affairs of our neighbors, to respect our neighbors. And this, alhamdulillah, we have managed to keep throughout all these years. This is the positive experience of multilateral approach. I would like now to address, I think, what we all now realize, which is the main problem in the Indo-Pacific area, or main issue, let us say, something that keeps many leaders of East Asia, Indo-Pacific, awake at night. We can call it the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the situation in the South China Sea and the possibility of a flare-up around Taiwan. As we look now once again to regional dynamics, we are now forced to face the reality that tensions could flare up at any time. The world has become a smaller place. What happens in one place will influence many, many places elsewhere. There is an ancient proverb which says, 1,000 friends are too few, one enemy is too many. What does that mean for Indonesia? First of all, we offer respect for all powers. We recognize the interest of the United States of America as one of the preeminent powers ranging across hemispheres. but we also have stood by a very long by a one China policy. We recognize Beijing's legitimate core interests, and we support and respect Beijing's rightful place as a great world power. China has been for thousands of years a leading civilization. It is only natural that they will take their proper place in the destiny of mankind. For us, acknowledging both of these realities is not a zero-sum game. We seek understanding and cooperation with both. Second, we seek regional stability, especially with regard to unimpeded access to sea and air lanes in the immediate neighborhood and beyond. Third, we remain committed to a multilateral approach through ASEAN to include the defense realm. Steps have already been taken in this regard, such as multilateral maritime exercises. We also launched the Our Eyes intelligence sharing program. We also have maritime exercises, joint patrols. We have trilateral patrols between Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. We are now preparing trilateral patrols between India, Indonesia, and Australia, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, and Singapore. So this is what we are trying to enhance. Recently, of course, we see more and more realignment in the Indo-Pacific area. We see lately new multilateralisms. We support basically the right of every country to defend and enhance their sovereign rights. And we respect these sovereign decisions. Distinguished guests, I will not go too much into detail. Maybe my speech can be distributed after it's been edited a bit. I would just like to share with you that although we have been blessed for basically nearly 40 years of basic peace and prosperity in Southeast Asia, perhaps we have been a bit too complacent because of our lively democratic process and because in our experience, the Indonesian military, let us say 22 years ago, voluntarily withdrew from political life. I think we are one of the first, maybe few militaries who withdrew voluntarily from political life. I was, at that time, one of the few military leaders who supported and basically engineered this withdrawal from active political participation. Why? Because Indonesia spans a very wide territory. We have the same national territorial size basically as Western Europe. Western Europe, London to Moscow, is like flying from our westernmost point to our easternmost point. 7.5 hours flight. We have 3 time zones. We have nearly 300 million people now, many ethnic groups, we have maybe 300, 400 local languages, and therefore the military leaders realized that no military can manage the governance of this large size, and therefore we opted for democracy and we withdrew from active military political participation. What does that mean? What does this mean? This means that the Indonesian civil society has taken a very strong role. And as we understand, the civil society everywhere, maybe in Indonesia especially, do not like a strong military. They do not like big defense spending, because defense spending, which is large, sometimes is considered to be at the expense of social spending, of economic development. This is what we are trying to convince our civil society, that defense is a requirement for peace. There can be no peace without a strong defense. There can be no prosperity without peace. And even if we are willing to forego a strong defense, history teaches us that well-intentions do not ensure security. If we are weak, history teaches us that the strong usually will trample on the weak. So let me conclude my comments by offering the famous teaching from the Greek historian Thucydides. He said, the strong will do what they can. The weak suffer what they must. Therefore, if you want to be independent and free, it is not enough to have good intentions. One must be strong to protect our people. One must be strong to protect our sovereign rights. While this teaching from Thucydides is certainly true, I would repeat the cautionary note that I have made many times. The world has become a small, crowded place, made that much smaller in a virtual sense by the digital information revolution. We have many big threats to our planet: the environmental threat, the climatic change. We are experiencing a pandemic. We do not know what other pandemics will come and when. Therefore, in my defense planning, next year alone, we will build 40 new hospitals, and we will enhance the 110 military hospitals that we already have. We will add 40 to the 110 we already have, and we will open our hospitals to support civil society, to support our civilian population. For instance, my experience a few weeks ago, I opened a hospital, 200 beds. In the first month, we had 400 COVID patients. Alhamdulillah, thank God, the 400 patients all survived. None of them died, and that shows that a real effort to participate in the mitigation of this bio-security threat will really help the welfare of the people. As I said, the strong will do what they can, the weak suffer what they must. However, strength alone does not ensure peace and security. We know that universal values now have become more prevalent and more urgent. By this I mean the desire for peace have become global. The desire for freedom of expression, for social justice, for freedom of creativity have all become necessary. This should and must make those who wield power and strength to take pause. They must place more emphasis on values and rules, respect for human rights, protection of minorities, safeguard against further degradation of our environment. In the end, power must be balanced with benevolence. As Confucius noted, those seeking to retain the mandate of heaven are leaders that reflect benevolence, respectfulness, and deference. The great powers of today would best be served to take this to heart. Only then will history judge them to have become not just great powers, but more important and enduring, great civilizations. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Minister, for those opening remarks, and we will certainly distribute your remarks as soon as we have them finalized. I was lucky enough to read your full text, and there are many other perceptions there that I think could be usefully shared. We might just take one or two questions before we leave now for dinner. I might just ask you the first. You mentioned in your remarks that you respect the sovereign decisions that countries in the region take to protect their strategic interests in the way in which they choose. Recently, there has been a new, very specialized minilateral arrangement made between the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia to support nuclear propulsion in Australia, and also to share technology in the cyber and AI and quantum realms. Is that a minilateral arrangement that Indonesia can see as supportive of the strategic situation in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, officially, our position is that, of course, Southeast Asia should remain nuclear-free. And the fear, of course, among Southeast Asian nations is that this will spark an arms race. This will spark more countries seeking nuclear submarines. And we know that now the technology is there. I think many other countries can very soon have nuclear submarines. I would say Japan, India, and many other countries. So that's the concern. But as I said, the emphasis of every country is to protect their national interest. If they feel threatened, if they feel that they have an existential threat, they will do whatever they can to protect themselves. And this is what I mean, that we understand that and we respect them. And therefore, for us, it makes us even more anxious to maintain dialogue, to maintain relationship, to mediate between these great powers. But as I said, that every country will do what they can to protect their national interest. If they feel threatened, we fully understand what they will do.
Thank you very much. I thought there was one question from here, from Musharraf Zaidi. Yes, if you stand, the microphone is right to your right, and we'll close with that question. Go ahead.
Thank you, John, and Minister Subianto. That was a fantastic speech. Thank you for that. I'm from Pakistan. I work for a think tank called Tabad Lab in Islamabad. We in Pakistan have always admired and maybe almost enviously looked at Indonesia as a big brother, being the largest Muslim majority country on the planet. You just mentioned the other big factor that we've envied, which is, of course, civilian supremacy and the military's voluntary withdrawal from public life and political life in the way that you described. And the other thing we've always admired about Indonesia is that we've always felt that the problem of extremism, of course, you've had a difficult challenge with terrorism, but the problem of extremism in your society isn't as profound or as problematic as maybe we've had to deal with and are dealing with currently. Over the last few years, though, as you successfully fought the war on terror, which Pakistan also did, in obviously different contexts with some connections, including Al-Qaeda's influence both in our part of the world and your part of the world, there was an increase in extremism in society more broadly. So I wanted you to maybe talk to us a little bit, not so much about the success of beating down terrorism, which you've successfully done, but the challenge of the coming decade and longer in terms of the pressures on politics and society and the state from within society, the growth of extremism, so that the strength that you have as a Muslim majority nation slowly begins to maybe corrode at some of the other strengths that you have as a society, and then threatens obviously the wider ambitions Indonesia has, both within the country and beyond its borders.
Thank you very much for your question and your kind words about Indonesia. As you know, we also admire Pakistan. I would like to make this observation. I believe, from my own experience, that extremism, radicalism of any sort will thrive when there is poverty, when there is inequality, when there is injustice, when the common people lose hope, when the poor do not get the same treatment in the courts of law, when they feel abandoned by the powerful, this is fertile ground for radicalism, for extremism. When there is justice, when there is real democracy, when there is accountability of leaders, when there is equal treatment in the courts of law, all these factors will make the extremist and radical propagators irrelevant. This is my conviction. So the challenge is, how do we provide these essentials? Social justice, economic justice, clean government, rule of law, equality of law in front of the courts. This is my conviction. And then we can have prosperity. Then we can have peace. This is our experience. This is our experience. We actually are blessed with a lot of wealth, but many of this wealth does not trickle down to the poor, to the masses. But we have done great strides. We have done great strides. But there is always rising expectation. When the poor, through the digital revolution, they see on television, they see the cars, they see the nice buildings, they see air condition, they see all these modern attributes, and they have no access. That, I think, is fertile ground for radicalism. Thank you. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Minister Prabowo, thank you very much for your opening address. I mentioned that the security situations in the Indo-Pacific and the Middle East were codependent. It's excellent that you bring to us the perspective from the Indo-Pacific, and that your relations with your colleagues in this part of the world are indeed so collegial that we can find multilateral solutions for peace and prosperity between the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you very much for joining us, and you've sung for your supper. It's time for you to enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the wisdom you have given me. Thank you.